Over the next couple of chapters, we're going to be talking about metabolism in the cell. You're probably coming to class with some idea of metabolism, but we tend to think of it as just the burning of calories, when in reality, metabolism is really all of the different chemical reactions that happen in an organism. So that does include things like burning calories, but it also includes making fat, making muscle, or in the case of this mushroom, making a green fluorescing protein. All of those are chemical reactions that happen in the cell, and all of them are part of metabolism. Since these metabolic processes are all about chemical reactions, we're going to start out by spending some time really understanding what drives chemical reactions to occur the way that they occur. So most of you are probably familiar with the way that chemical reactions are drawn. So this is one example. I'm going to write that in a little bit of a different way up here. In the way that I've drawn this reaction, this would be the reactants and these would be the products. But it's possible that the arrow would go the other direction. In that case, the same molecules, the relationship is reversed. C and D are the reactants, and A and B are the products. So the first thing we want to understand about reactions is what direction will that arrow go? Will I make C and D, or will I make A and B? This is going to depend on something called energy, which again is a term that you've seen before but maybe haven't fully understood, as well as the concentrations of the molecules involved. While the direction is dependent on those factors, it can be manipulated by the cell by using energy from a different molecule. ATP is a molecule we're going to start talking a lot about, and it will be able to provide energy to cause a reaction to go in a particular direction. The second factor of chemical reactions is how fast this will happen. So the direction of the reaction may be to go towards C and D, but will it take 1,000 years to make C and D, or will it take 10 seconds? That is going to depend on whether or not there is activation energy and the presence of things called enzymes in living cells. Enzymes will be able to make reactions go faster. So over this whole chapter, we're going to mainly be focusing on these themes. What direction will a reaction go, and how fast will it go? So we'll start out with direction, and this is going to center on energy. And again, I know you came to class with an idea of what energy is, but it actually has a really formal definition. The definition of energy is the ability to promote change. So that kind of sounds a little confusing, but we're going to walk through some examples. So the one that most people are pretty comfortable with is heat. Heat is a form of energy, and think about the change that heat can promote. I can take liquid water and I can turn it into gas. So wow, that's a pretty profound change I can cause. Light is actually a form of energy. And to think about how light promotes change, think about how your dark curtains will eventually fade to a lighter color. And that's because there's things happening in the molecules of the fabric that are causing that fading to occur. And so the light energy is promoting that change. Another one that we're pretty familiar with is kinetic energy. This is the energy associated with movement. So if you're moving your muscles, you're going for a run, if something's falling down the hill, that's all kinetic energy. Potential energy is another important form of energy. So potential energy is when there's the potential for change. So if energy is the ability to promote change, potential energy is the potential to promote change. And probably one of the most classic examples is involving gravity. So if I hold up this pen, I'm moving it away from the Earth's surface, and because of gravity, if I let that go, it will fall. right? So right now it has the potential to fall. It's not falling, so it doesn't have kinetic energy. But if I let it go, it falls. So this is high potential energy. That potential energy becomes kinetic energy as it moves. We're going to talk a lot about chemical energy, which is a form of potential energy. Chemical potential energy is the energy that is present and stored in bonds. So if I have two carbons covalently bonded to each other, there is energy stored in that bond because there is the potential for that bond to break, which is the change. Another form of energy, and this one is harder to grasp at first, but if we think about chapter 5, it's not as hard. It's a gradient energy. So remember that we talked about diffusion. So if I have a high concentration on one side of a membrane and a low concentration on the other side, then diffusion will occur across that membrane. Molecules will move from one side to another. Is that a change? You bet. So a gradient is promoting that. So it's a form of energy. We're going to be focusing a lot on glucose. Glucose has these covalent bonds between carbons, and these bonds store a lot of energy. So glucose is a molecule with a lot of chemical potential energy that will be able to be utilized by the cell in complex metabolic processes, cellular respiration, that we're going to talk about in the next chapter next week. Oops. Energy is going to be converted from one form to another, and I kind of alluded to that already when I said I held up this pen. It has potential energy. If I let it go, that potential energy gets converted to kinetic energy. If we explore this example a little more, we have our diver at the top of the board. And at the top of the board, again, kind of like my pen, he has a lot of kinetic energy, or rather potential energy. So he has high potential energy because of gravity. As he falls or dives, that potential energy is becoming kinetic energy. So it's actually that exact potential energy is converting to this kinetic energy. And then at the bottom, he'll have low potential energy because it all was lost as kinetic energy. Then the diver is going to climb back up the stairs. So he's going to take kinetic energy, which is the energy of the movement of his muscles rather, and that's rebuilding or re-putting in that potential energy. You can do a lot of fun stuff, or to me anyway, I think this is cool, with energy transformations. You can just keep tracing it back and back and back. So if you think about the kinetic energy of the muscles, where did that come from? Well, that has to come from the chemical energy in his meal. And if he ate that meal and it came from a cow, then that was chemical energy in the cow. Where did the cow get that chemical energy from? Plants. And where did the plants get that chemical energy? From the sun. So the cycle of life, or the life itself, is really dependent on sun energy. So ultimately, all of the energy in living things comes from energy transformations from the sun. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, we'll break out these energy transformations even more and talk about how plants do this and the energy transformations involved there. There's actually 3 or 4 steps. And same thing in how the cow then extracts that energy from plants. So these energy conversions that I was talking about with the diver must follow certain laws of the universe, and these are called the laws of thermodynamics. The first law says that energy is never created or destroyed. It changes form. So again, in the previous example, we said that the potential energy that he had at the top, right, high potential at the top, potential energy, low potential energy at the bottom, that energy isn't destroyed, it doesn't disappear, it instead is converted to kinetic energy. So transformations rather than destruction or loss. And like I said earlier, if he had that kinetic energy has to come from somewhere, then he rebuilds the kinetic energy, and that has to come from his food. That had to come from the energy in the cow. That had to come from the energy in the plants. That had to come from the energy in the sun. And you can, someday learn about what happens in the sun and where that energy came from too. The second law of thermodynamics is that these transformations of energy must increase something called entropy. Entropy is the disorder. So in this law can just be restated a little more simply as the universe and the energy transformations within it will always go towards disorder. So what would that look like? We have something that's very highly ordered. An increase in entropy is when we have less order. And again, this is hopefully fairly intuitive because I always say things fall apart on their own. So this is a spontaneous process. It happens on its own because of the laws of thermodynamics. To explore that a little further, we could think of the example of a salt crystal. So if I have a salt crystal, eventually that will dissolve into my sodium and chloride ions. This is very ordered. A crystal is. These are more disordered. So this has more entropy. This is spontaneous. So if I had this in my cup at home, this would eventually happen on its own. And I know you're used to thinking, well, I need to stir it or I need to heat it up. That makes it faster. But if you just left those crystals there, it would happen on its own. So at this point, if everything in the universe must go towards disorder, you might recognize a little bit of a problem. Because remember, at the beginning of the semester, we talked about the properties of life. And one of those key properties is organization and order. Living things are highly ordered. How can they possibly be highly ordered if we must follow this law of the universe, if we do in fact follow this law of the universe? And the key here is that in order for us to be ordered, we must disorder. So again, thinking about these laws applying to the whole big picture, my body is able to be ordered because I create disorder in different things. So when I eat my food, I break it down, and that increases the disorder of the universe. Even though my body itself is ordered, I can only maintain that order by disordering other living things. And if you think about that, then when we are no longer able to eat living things or use energy, burn calories, like when we die, then our bodies will go to disorder. So we only maintain that order when we have all those metabolic reactions that are turning everything else that we bring into our bodies into disorder. So we live at the expense of other organisms. So that's the intro to energy. And in the next section, we'll get into free energy and talk about how that's going to determine the direction of a reaction.